call this meeting, I will call to order this meeting of the Policy Committee. In Karina's absence, I'm serving as interim chair until we have the new committees assigned in early December. So, um, and I know that we have a hard stop probably a few minutes before 7 o'clock so that we can get the curriculum committee meeting going. So we'll try to watch the time. The first discussion item is COVID-19 temporary policy, use of face coverings in school. And I think we all know that this came before the committee a while ago and then went to the full Board of Education for its first read. During that, I think a couple of questions were raised. And so the decision was to have it come back to committee to further discuss what those questions were. Just if I could summarize those really quickly, I think one was a comment that the policy as written might be overly broad in terms of changes being able to be implemented without Board of Education approval. And then the second question was around that it references school events, but doesn't exclude those taking place virtually or at locations other than the Ridgefield Public Schools, who may have different rules, such as sporting events or field trips and stuff. So I think if we could focus our conversation today kind of around those two areas. Board members, let me know, or Susie, let me know if I missed anything else, but I think that encapsulated the questions, right?
It is. I actually had reached out to Ms. Flogel to ask her just for a little bit of follow-up to make sure that we were clear coming into this meeting of what were the concerns, and I think you summarized them well. I think one is a little bit easier to navigate than the other. So I don't know if maybe the best place to start is to look at that second point that you bring up, which is the reference to school events, not excluding those taking place virtually.
Yes.
We also had the CABE policy as well that was offered to us. So I was looking there to see if there was a different opportunity that would have helped us just clarify that, but I actually didn't see anything. I don't know if anyone else did. But either way, I think it's easy enough to add in some language if we wanted to, or if this committee agreed to, that would help clarify that a little bit.
I would agree. I looked through the CABE policy. I mean, that's a far more detailed policy. So it's almost philosophically just even going in a completely different direction of having so much of it prescribed in the policy. And I think this board, what I've seen is more about the policies or guidance and a little bit more broad rather than so prescriptive. But
I have a couple opinions on this. Is this a good time?
Yeah.
First of all, I think the primary concern was just on its face, almost practically invalid. There's nobody who's doing remote studying from home that feels like they need to wear a mask. And that was the example that was given during our meeting. And it's just not realistic. It's just not realistic. No one at home, nobody that's on their laptop or on their Chromebook at home thinks, oh God, I got to put on my mask. School's, class is about to start. So just on its face, I think that's my opinion on that. The other thing is it's an operational policy, and operations are left to the superintendent. So I don't think that the board needs to be involved in any minor change to the policy that we want to keep broad so that it can be adapted quickly. As we've seen over the last week to week and a half, that we're in a situation that changes, that's dynamic, and it changes daily. And just even as a board, we meet every 2 weeks. I don't think that that's a practical solution. So that's just my opinion on both of those. To your point, Dr. De Silva, could we add some language? Yes, but it's almost like I don't like to entertain. Just on its face, it's not a valid argument, and so I have a challenge with it personally. I don't think it's necessary. Therefore, I don't think we should do it. So, other than that, we use. I'm a huge fan of Oxford commas. I don't know if there's anyone else out there, and we do use them in this document, but not consistently. So I think we either need to use them all the time or not use them at all. I vote for all the time, but I've noted a couple. Like maybe there's 6 places where we need to insert a comma, just to lighten up the conversation a little bit.
I thought you were a numbers guy, not a.
Oh no, this nope. Order. I think order. I like order.
I don't know. Do we want to take those commas from Ken now, or I don't know if Nora or Tina has any comment just in general broadly on the policy.
No, I kind of agree with Ken. I mean, I've been watching this for some time. As broad as you can leave it, I think makes sense. I completely agree. I did watch, I mean, I wasn't part of the board that time, but I did watch the meeting. And I do understand Ms. Flogel's concerns, but I think the policy as written is pretty broad in itself. I mean, there is no language that says that kids are, they have to use a mask or they have to do something. So I think this reads well. I mean, except I agree with you, Ken. I did go through that too. I did look at some places where we need something extra and, yep, totally agree on that part. Yes.
I had one comment too.
Sure.
I do agree with Ken, but also it mentions like protocol if the mask wearing isn't followed. And I wondered where those regulations or protocols are if they're in a different policy, because they're not stated here. Like at an athletic event, if a spectator is not complying with the mask wearing protocol, what is the fallout to that, and what can a person do who wants that implemented? Like, is that stated anywhere differently, or should that be in here?
Well, there is in that second paragraph there is they can be denied admission and required to leave the premises.
Right, but I mean, I happened to come into that experience at a football game recently where a couple was refusing to put their mask on, and so I wonder in that case what one does, or what the options are, and if people know what those would be.
Was that a Ridgefield
Yes.
football game? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I think the challenge that you're bringing up, Nora, is the implementation of our guidelines that we would expect those that are engaging in our activities to adhere to, and quote unquote policing that, which I think has been or we anticipated would be a challenge. So those that are at the school event, that are school staff, would be expected to ask those individuals to follow our policy and or our practices. But there are going to be those occasions where it's exactly what you noticed and someone else isn't noticing it, or someone isn't quote unquote policing it and following through. But it would be the expectation, as it is outlined in that second paragraph, that they would follow our procedures.
Okay.
I have another question. So in the third paragraph, it says all individuals participating in or attending any school-sponsored activities must wear an appropriate face covering, whether or not these occur in a school building. Now, it leads to the question of clubs, right? Because most of these clubs are virtual. So does that mean, does that make a difference? Because it is a school-sponsored activity.
Well, I think that goes to Ken's point earlier, right? Ken, is that if these were virtual, that one is under the assumption if you're in a space, yes, what I would say though, Tina, just to maybe add a little bit of another piece and maybe something we should be considering is when we're virtual, but we're in the same room.
Yes.
Right. So,
Yes.
and that
Yes.
is a caveat that I actually didn't think about until Tina just brought it up, is that there are times when there could be a school sponsored event, right? But we happen to be in the same room. And so in that occasion, one would be expected to follow our face covering policy, right? Our mask policy, because if I'm in the same room with Erin, which many a times I am, and we might be engaging in a virtual event, which happens often, it would be expected that both Erin and I have our masks on if the social distancing doesn't allow for anything other than that. Erin,
So Susie, would it be kind of appropriate to say something along the lines of when physically present
Yes.
in a school-sponsored activity?
But don't we cover that?
Yeah.
Because I would be in a school building or a district facility, and if it's not, then that would be governed by the rules of whatever facility you were in. So like say you were at a CABE meeting or something and you were both at a Hilton up in Hartford, that would then be whatever is driving that particular facility. But if it's a school event in Ridgefield or a club meeting that's taking place in one of our facilities or in the school building, that would be covered by this policy already. And if you're in the building, you wear it. And the people
Right. I'm thinking, so no, we're not doing it, but I'm thinking like the club or a sports event or a field trip. So say we think there's a reason there should be a field trip. So we're not in our facilities, but we expect you to adhere to this. And if you could be remoting in or physically present, it was just a suggestion.
Oh, absolutely. But then I think that's covered by attending any school sponsored
activity. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
then it may not be needed.
Yeah. So I think it's covered. I think that's why I think it's a really good, other than the Oxford comma thing, I think it's a really good, well-written policy. Grammatically, I have two other things, but it's not meat. It's not the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about. Which I'm ready to share if we're good. Should I just do them now?
Sure.
I don't think, at least I missed, if I did, I missed it. In the first paragraph where we do an abbreviation for the State Department of Education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We don't reference that again, so we don't need to have the acronym.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's not the correct acronym.
Right.
No, it's not. Yeah, it's CSDE,
DOE,
right?
SDOE. So the other one is again along the lines of the Oxford commas. I'm not a big fan of and/or, and I think reading through the policy, I think and is the appropriate use some of the time, but or is some of the other time. So I think we should just make a commitment to and or when it's appropriate. But I can go either way with that. I know that is a popular thing. The more important one is in that third paragraph is a mouthful. And I had at least a half a dozen readings to make sense of I know what it's trying to say, but to an uninvolved party coming in and reading it for the first time. I think that the last phrase, the four athletes participating in certain athletic activities, I think that's an example of what this paragraph is referring to. And so I think that's better as a parenthetical reference and then with a for example thrown in. Because we're talking about, unless an applicable exception applies, the administration in consultation with the local health department determines that face coverings are not required for athletes participating in certain activities, for example. Because there could be other examples where maybe it's not an athletic activity, maybe, or an organized, say when I'm sitting here with athletic activity, I'm thinking like a sports game. But to your point, Karen, maybe it's a hike. Maybe there's some other, it's a charity walk, for example. So that wouldn't necessarily be an athletic event, but it would be a fundraising event. So I think just if we put that parenthetically, I think that's the primary example, but there could be other cases where that would happen.
So are you suggesting that where it says unless an applicable exception applies, period, and then the parenthetical or the administration?
No, it's a long and wordy sentence, but it can all still be one sentence, but just sort of after that last, the second to last line, that face going into the last line, coverings are not required. Parentheses for athletes participating in certain activities, add, for example, close the parentheses and put the period.
Yep. Agreed.
Who makes these edits just from a practical standpoint?
Typically what happens is, well, Margaret, I don't know what happens here. So maybe.
So the model policy is given to us by Shipman and Goodwin, but then I think when we have edits, I think Cheryl would help to make those edits for us.
Okay.
Into the Word document.
So traditionally the chair of the committee would make all the edits kind of in some type of
Oh,
version,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then they would hand them to Cheryl, and Cheryl would make them.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
So-
didn't want to give Margaret another job just in
Yeah,
case.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
okay. I'm tracking. I got my red pen.
I thought I was ahead.
Did you
So
hear
we
that,
could
Ken?
talk offline about the commas if you want, just so we don't have to go line by line. And
Will it take like 2 seconds now? Because we have about 3 more minutes before we want to switch to the next topic. If you're
no, I think
Okay.
it's
I'll
almost
follow up
silly. We could do it offline.
okay, cool. I'll follow up with you.
Good to have an eagle eye.
Yeah. All right. So it sounds like, other than some grammatical edits, we're not going to change this policy. I mean, again, I would also, I think you gave some really good rationale, Ken. I think we all agreed with that. It also, this is part of the COVID-19 series in our policies, which starts out right at the front, basically saying we will follow all guidelines that are given, all legal orders as well as guidelines given by the State Department of Education. So if anybody had any concern about implementation and guidelines, it says right there at the front of the packet that all of the following policies adhere to that. So
Yeah, I wonder if there's anything, and I guess this is a question maybe for Aaron. Aaron, in the 4th line where it says exactly what Margaret just described, do we want to add anything about the Department of Public Health? Because I feel like that's what's missing here.
Yes,
Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed.
I think that makes sense. All of the guidelines
Yep.
that we're following are jointly issued by the DPH and the Connecticut State Department of Education.
Yep.
So I think that makes good sense.
do we do an and or there?
And why can't we do and? And is appropriate.
Yeah, there's no or, right? Because it's a
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll tell you.
We could use Aaron's language that says guidelines issued jointly by the Connecticut.
There you go.
Okay,
yes.
that's
There
okay.
you go. Mhm.
There you go.
But then
agreed.
what happens if one of them issues one and the other one doesn't?
That was what I was going to say. That's the or part of the and or.
State guidelines.
So the jointly is fine. So I'm sorry, when we said the State Department of Health, or is it the local Department of Health?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Aaron.
It's the State Department of Health.
Okay.
But it's also, I mean, it's both, but I would say the state because they're sort of the same thing, but it's a good
Okay.
one. I think I would say state for
State.
policy, but then for specific situations that arise, of course, we do
Okay.
That's fair.
local.
Okay, that's
All
fair.
right, so then in that third paragraph, local.
That's what I was going to ask. Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
Okay. All right.
So just as a foreshadowing, when we bring this back to the board, these questions are going to arise about wearing the masks at home, et cetera. As a committee, are we prepared to defend our choice now?
Yes.
Okay.
I want to make sure that I'm capturing or we're capturing the concern fully because
Right. Exactly.
Yes.
it said that it referenced school events, not excluding those taking place virtually. Okay, we clarified that part, right? Or at locations other than RPS who may have different rules. For example, e.g. sports events where the school has other policies that may prevail.
So if an athletic team was participating, let's say down in Darien or something, and Darien had a different set of rules regarding mask wearing than we have, right?
Right.
That's-
So, I'm trying to actually potentially think, is that even possible?
Well, that's what yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and the other thing is where we can't, our rules can't dictate what their rules say. So we, if we say it's a school sponsored activity and we require you to wear a mask, then our sports team should wear a mask regardless of what their rules say.
Right.
Right. So even if, let's just say hypothetically, Darien said, no, you don't need to wear your masks when you enter onto the campus. If our rule says that when you enter any campus on a school-sponsored football game, then you're to wear your mask. Our students would be expected
Yes,
to wear their masks.
Yep.
I think so.
Just for frame of reference, we have students who very minimally now, but still are out in the community, either in job sites or doing community-based services, and we are expecting them to follow the school rules around mask wearing, even if where they are has less restrictive rules.
That's a great example.
That's a good example.
I like that.
Okay, so just to the Ms. Flogel's second question or second area, I think we've answered that now, right?
I think so.
Okay, the second one, I mean, the first one, as you know, was that it was overly broad in terms of changes being able to be implemented without the Board of Education approval. I think, that's tricky because it is operational and we make the decisions.
It's not tricky at all. It's
Tricky for me.
No, it's not. Well, yes, it's tricky for you. Yeah, but from a board perspective, you're in charge of operations, operational decisions, and this is an operational decision. So we would expect you to make it.
Right. It does say, that we've authorized the superintendent to develop administrative regulations or protocols. So I know we've got protocols. Yeah. Where would somebody find those though if they had the question about that?
Right now, you would find those on our COVID site.
Right.
On the district COVID site.
Right. So we can say we've got those and they're available to the public. So, yep. Okay. Anything else on the mask policy?
For the one-page policy.
I know, right? Those are always the doozies. All right. On to the next. So discussion items B and C are actually kind of intertwined. You probably, as you got them, like, what is all this? So I'll try my best to explain why they're on here, how they got on here. And Dr. De Silva, please feel free to chime in if I butcher this. But how it came up was actually 5141.4, which is the reporting of child abuse and neglect, was actually flagged by CABE over the summer as being a policy that needed updating because there was a change to the way mandated reporters could report. Like they can now report electronically, and that was not in the old policy. So we were going to go ahead and make that change, but we realized that our existing version of that policy was from 2011 and hadn't had some other updates that have happened along the way in the ensuing years. So when we went back to try to look and see how to update it for this electronic reporting, there was actually quite a bit more that needed to be updated, including actually adding sexual abuse as part of the things that are covered under this one policy. So that redlined version of the policy that you got kind of mid-afternoon today is what updates the policy with all the changes basically that have come since like 2011 and that we haven't updated with. The reason 5145.511 was included in the packet is because that's a policy that we updated and approved about a year ago. And that was because Shipman and Goodwin had flagged for us that one needed to be updated. So that one is fine as it is, but it talks about sexual abuse. And so now that 5141.4 also does, the two policies cross-reference each other. So that's why it was important to kind of see both of them in the context of each other. And to make sure that when we do make any updates to 5141.4, that we make any corresponding update to the reference in 5145.511. I don't know if that was good. So really the changes to 5141.4, as I said, there are changes that are legal in nature about that electronic reporting, the adding of sexual assault in the title and in the body of it, references to the 5145.511, and then a lot of changes to the references and the legal references at the end. You'll notice there's a lot of changes in the red line version. So I don't know, Dr. De Silva or Karen, if you had anything more on that.
You captured it well. So the document that CABE had provided, basically in that first paragraph on the left side, and then the first full paragraph on the right side, I think capture the the changes best. Karen, do you want to talk at all about implementation or what's happening currently with our staff?
Yeah, so we have obviously implemented changes along the way. So a couple things are, so obviously all employees and our substitutes or anybody in our buildings, we are mandated reporters. And so we do require that they participate in mandated reporter training prior to stepping into our buildings. So part of our hiring packet, and you cannot go on site, is unless you've gone through that training and we have verification, we do keep records of those trainings. In addition, when we hire employees, we have to have them submit to a DCF check, and which is something that we do. And I know that came up in our other policy conversation as it relates to background checks. So we have the training component and we have the, check-in component as well. So we do keep those records and we have been up to date since those changes in that regulation or law.
Right.
There's something I would add that makes this provision a little bit different regarding sexual assault, is that it doesn't necessarily base it on age, which DCF is relative to under 18. It associates it with just being a student, which means you could be over the age of 18, and it specifies sexual assault by an employee, and that it could still be fallen under a mandated reporter just as a student, not necessarily as a minor.
You're right. Yes, I saw that in the language that Gabe had provided. So thank you for pointing that out. So in other words, it sounds like in practice, we've been doing what needed to be done. The policy just now needs to catch up with the law and with our practice, but we've been performing at the level that we needed to.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So I know there was a lot, like I said, I apologize for that, that red line version coming mid-afternoon today. I don't anticipate, I'm not expecting that we're going to have resolution on this policy tonight, because I know you probably need a chance to digest those changes, really think them through and stuff. And we can maybe, take any questions that you have now, but then realize that this will probably come back to the policy committee in our next meeting before we bring it to the full board. If that makes
Margaret,
sense.
just maybe for clarification, and probably even I think for Tina that's new, the reason you had to do the red line version in this case, correct? Because you actually made
Yes.
these changes was because we didn't have a red line version from Shipman and or Cape.
Correct.
And so sometimes, Tina, for your benefit, we have the benefit of having those documents that have a version that we can look at. But in this particular case, we didn't. We just had the attached document that you received from Cheryl.
Right. And initially, we thought the changes to this policy would be pretty minimal based on that electronic reporting. But then as we dug in, that's when we realized, oh, wow, there's a lot more, as Dr. Henley referenced and as Karen Doing referenced. So I don't know if on the, if the stuff that you had to review, if anybody has any questions just off the bat for us to consider or get more information on before our next policy meeting. Or go, Nora?
I had one point on page 6. Which was the use of the phrase mentally retarded. I thought that was really actually changed to intellectual disability. Okay.
You're on page 6 of the red line?
No.
So, I didn't, so that's actually page 6 of the policy of our existing policy. The regulations actually start on page 3, I think, right? 3 of the 6, and they go pages 3, 4, 5, and 6. I did not redline those. They were also adopted back in 2011. But again, because the regulations are operational and done by the district and don't need to be approved by the board, that would be, I agree. I think once we agree on the policy, I think the regulations need to be updated to conform with the policy, as well as you said, some other obvious changes.
Okay.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Why was not her?
Karen, I had a question for you actually, because in one of Cabe's They had a lot of different versions of this. In one of their updated model policies, they were talking about, and you had talked a little bit about the training,
Mhm.
but they referenced, again, this was just in one version, but I wasn't sure if we did this in practice, so I did not add it to the red line version. It said,
Mhm.
each school employee is required to complete a refresher training program not
Yep.
later than 3 years after completion of the initial training program and shall thereafter retake such refresher training course at least once every 3 years, and that the principal of each school in the district shall annually certify to the superintendent that each school employee working at such school has completed the required initial training and the refresher training.
Yep. So we actually take it even further than that, and we do it annually.
Mhm.
So it's done upon hire,
Yeah.
and then we do it as part of our August professional development for all employees, so they can get it every single year. We don't wait every 3 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure because it felt like that if we didn't already have that in place, that might be cumbersome.
Yeah.
Sounds
So
like
it's our way that I can have somebody that could have been hired in February. They did it in February, and then they do it again in August as part of their annual training. So that is something that we just do, so that maybe we ensure that we catch everybody every year.
Oh, good. Okay. So I did not add that to the red line version of the policy. I can go ahead and do that for the next time that we look at it. It was the suggested language is part of the policy as opposed to part of the regulation. I don't know if anybody has any feeling about whether it belongs in policy or regulation on that.
I mean, if you do it every 3 years, we're conservative to make sure we do it. So I wouldn't want to, put in the every year annual in case we miss one person. But just know in practice, that's what we do to ensure that all of our staff are up to date at all times.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Anything else on either of these policies? All right. Great. Then we'll move on to discussion item D, which is 4118.22 Personnel Code of Ethics. The reason that one is on here is because actually Shipman and Goodwin, again, in their suggested policy updates from the summer, said the Code of Ethics is a new policy designed to provide employees notice of expected professional conduct. You probably noticed as you looked at our version, which is from 11, I'm sorry. Brevity was the name of the game, but it does look like Shipman is saying that it's at this point, just to give notice to employees so that they get a fair understanding of what those responsibilities are, that we actually outline it more in policy, which is why it's far more detailed. Karen, I don't know if you had any comments on this one or.
So the 2011 version was CABE. We used CABE at that time. So I do believe many of these cross over into other aspects of our work, such as for the teachers and the professional code of responsibility. We have some training, but it's not as comprehensive for all employees as this version is.
Okay.
I did notice that when it comes to, say, quote, holiday gifts and end of the year gifts, there is an optional version there. I do believe that my recommendation would be that the board put something like that in because it will beg questions from our staff if we have a policy that bans anything. Because that issue has come up over the years. And
Do we have a policy around gifts, Karen?
I'm not aware of, outside of the gifts to the board that business office would take. So I would have to look into that more.
Gifts from parents to teachers. We don't, not that you know offhand.
Offhand, I don't for a specific amount.
Okay. Right. So you're saying to keep that language, make sure that we keep that language in there, not optional.
Unless you want to, prohibit that. I just said that is something that has come up over the years as we've talked about this type of potential conflict or conduct.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Karen, just can you clarify what's come up? Is it just
Well, the acceptance of gifts and not using your position for personal gain. So that concept has come up. Obviously, none of us can use our personal, our position for personal gain. And so over the years, the question of, well, can, the teacher give me, my parent of one of my students give me a mug? And is that worth, so when we tried to put a dollar amount on that, well, is that mug worth $19.99 or is it worth $29.99? And so I just think that the board, if we're going to include something about this, should have some parameters so that we can effectively administer what the board wishes.
So the policy that we do have is, the only one that we have is 1313, which basically says that they shall not accept gifts. School employees or volunteers shall not accept gifts for the purpose or the expectation of influencing their actions or decisions.
Right. And so that's where we came. We didn't want to nickel and dime and have a dollar amount, but we didn't want to say that you can't take a holiday gift or an end of the year gift from, a parent.
So would the 1313 apply here? That you're allowed to receive those gifts so long as there is not an expectation that it influences your decision making at all?
I think that's tough to put in writing, because what if the intention of the gift was to influence the teacher? You can use our house at the Cape for 2 weeks over the summer, and now it's a wink wink nudge nudge,
Yep.
Yeah.
So
I think there's a professionalism though that we have to acknowledge and respect. That I really do.
I agree with you, Nora. That's what I'm saying. I think if we put the way that it's currently written, it's putting an onus on the teacher and sort of taking away that professional judgment that I think you're referring to. Or at least that's my interpretation of it.
So I think what you're suggesting, though, Ken, is to take out that optional.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I do think, it's got that word from accepting typical and customary gifts. I mean, one could argue that that's, not the house in the Hamptons, but the littler ones, but. Any other comments about anything?
So are we? So I got I'm looking at the hard copy packet.
Yeah.
I'm having some connection issues. So I'm looking. So I have our 4118.22.
Yep.
The brevity, and then I have the series 4000.
Yep.
So those are the two documents I'm looking at.
Yep.
The way that this is written is applies just to members of the board. Are we going to change that language? Is that the intent, is to change this language to all RPS employees?
I think so. I understood this to be that the board is expecting that all board employees, meaning all RPS employees.
But my impression was that you're the only board employee, and everyone else is an employee of the school district.
No, everybody, I believe, is an employee of the Board of Education. Is that the way?
So we can clarify that by substituting board employees by Ridgefield Public Schools employees.
Okay, isn't every individual who works for the Ridgefield Public Schools and a Board of Education employee? I know it's semantic, but
no, I interpret it broadly, like you, Dr. De Silva.
I interpret it that way. I'm curious. I was just going to look and see if in other policies how we reference that, because I do think in other policies they are talked about as board employees, but I'm not sure it's consistent, to be quite honest. And I understand where Ken is coming from in terms of the confusion for the layman about that.
And I like Karen's suggestion on the language. I'm good with, but I think from just an academic, the semantics question I'm interested in that. Because it's for the same reason we can't hire and fire a teacher. So technically, she's not. He or she would not be an employee of ours.
In fairness, Ken, I'll disagree. I do think
Okay.
we're all board employees.
Okay.
We're hired by the Board of Ed. However, you have designated your right to hire us to Susan.
Okay.
And your only role is to hire her. So it's your policy that gives her the right to make the decisions for everybody else.
Okay. See, semantics. I love them.
Yeah,
but
and it's funny though, because in my mind, for every district that I've ever worked in, regardless of my capacity, I've always seen myself as an employee of the Board of Education, whether it was a teacher or a principal or an assistant principal. So it's interesting that we're having this dialogue here now as to whether or not, I think what's most important is that the language be so, and maybe it needs to be board employees and something else, not an and or.
I'm okay if that's how it's if that is what it is, then I'm good. It was just more of not coming from an educational background and not. And I think to Margaret's point, I think I've seen it in other policies. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I think I've seen it in other policies where it refers to employees of Ridgefield Public Schools. And maybe even when we were doing background checks and looking at all of those relatively recently.
Yeah.
Some of that might even be, if we take a policy from CABE, it might say one thing, and a policy from Shipman and Goodwin, or if we do it. So it is probably.
So I appreciate the clarity, but again, to all of that point, I think we should be consistent.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. So maybe we can do as a follow-up on this one, we can just get some clarity around that just to make
sure. So it's kind of interesting. So now I pulled up our most recent food allergies. Remember that one?
Yeah.
And the way in which they start off is by saying the Ridgefield Public Schools, the district, right? So easily, if whatever way we want to do this, we could certainly say the Ridgefield Public Schools employees are expected to follow, et cetera. But I guess my point is, I'm not even sure within Shipman if they're consistent.
Right.
Right.
Probably not.
Yeah.
And also, who knows what we changed and what we did, what we kept of theirs versus what they originally had.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a small, it's important, but it's a small point in that we could decide on what we would like it to be. And then as we're adjusting policies going forward, we incorporate the agreed upon language.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I did notice that even in the other one, that sometimes it was referred to as district buildings and sometimes it was board stuff. So kind of to the point of consistency.
Yeah, so I think if we just decide, as a committee or even as a board, how we want to say that, then just going forward, we say it consistently. I don't think there's much point in going, combing through all of our policies and fixing it for that.
Yeah. Agreed. Okay, so that can be a next step. We'll just take a quick look at that. Anything else on this one that anybody saw, or do we feel that it's, presuming we're able to kind of get a little bit more clarification on that last issue? Is this something that we'd want to bring before the full board for a first read at our next meeting? No concerns?
No, is there, so back to my sort of off the wall example of if someone did offer a teacher, the use of their vacation home for a week over the summer or over the winter, their ski place in Stowe. Is there an expectation that that's okay? Is there an expectation that a teacher would report that to her building administration? Are there expectations around gifts that maybe are not typical and customary?
Karen, do you want to talk about past practice, and then I'll just jump in with my opinion?
Honestly, I don't have past practice. Our teachers are professional. And so I have not encountered or known of any instance of that happening. So I don't have a lot to add on that, except to say that I would trust our educators in doing the right thing, but I don't have any specifics to elaborate on.
What would be the right thing, in your opinion, then?
So that I'll give you
Sure.
my opinion on that one, Ken, is that it would not be appropriate for me to
Yep.
use your vacation home while I'm teaching your son.
Okay.
If your son has now been promoted and we've developed a great relationship when I was your son's teacher, and now your son is in third grade as opposed to second where I am a teacher, then I think that would be less of a concern.
So I can elaborate on that, Susie. So we do have a conflict of interest regulation that was developed, saying, it's very different when you're an educator and you're working with a student whom you would have also provided service to while you're serving as a Ridgefield Public Schools employee. So it kind of came around from tutoring. I can tutor you in 5th grade, but if you're my 5th grade student, I can't tutor you.
Right.
But now if you're in 8th grade or you're in 3rd grade, and I can tutor you. So that's where, related to Susie, it can be slightly different.
Okay. No, that makes sense.
It's a good example.
There is a policy, just going back to the gifts that Dawn had shared, policy 4118.24. It's not a super strong statement, but it does state the exchange of purchased gifts between staff members and students is discouraged. I don't think that's speaking of a holiday gift. It's kind of vague, but generally speaking.
And that would technically be from the parents anyway.
Yeah, that one would be right. The vacation.
Legalese I would use to get around that.
Yeah.
Would we want to reference that cross policy in like where we have legal references? Sometimes we put other policies there. Is that?
Well, I think it would have gone in 13, and I think Ken was suggesting that to leave out that optional language. Was that where it would have gone, Margaret?
Oh, I was even thinking just down, but not actually in the policy itself, but down like where we have like legal references. Sometimes we do like cross references to other policies that trigger you over to look there. I don't know.
And maybe referencing the conflict of interest policy there too.
Yeah, that's a regulation, not a policy. So.
Oh, okay. So listed as but refer to that regulation.
Mm-hmm.
Got me on my semantics, Karen.
There's no one better than Karen.
No, I like it.
There's no one better.
I like it.
It comes out of nowhere.
Sorry.
No, it's expected. I like it. I like it.
All right. Anything else on that one? So did we decide on that? We would bring it to do we want to bring it to the board on Monday?
So the only piece that I think we just need to tighten up is that language, Margaret, whether it's board employees and it still may be board employees, but what is the preferred choice? Is it Ridgefield Public Schools employee, district employee, board employee, regardless of what they actually are, right? They could be all three.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could talk about it at the board meeting because I think it is because it affects all the policies.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think looking at the other policies and seeing which one is used the most or even maybe not even the most, like what is a board, what do we prefer? Like what is our preference? And then again, as we review the policies in order or as necessary, then we change it where it needs to be changed.
Makes sense. All right. I think that's it. I think we made it through all the policies. So this, the only one, we will bring forward the COVID-19 temporary policy use of face coverings in school, as well as 4118.22 personnel code of ethics to the meeting. Okay. Anything else before we adjourn? right.
Good.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
All right, Ken, do I have a second? Nora, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you.
All right, everybody stay
Thank
safe.
you. Bye.